Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women is a new international normative standard that will define the future leaders. Another Nobel Prize winner, the renowned economist Amartya Sen at Harvard, has argued that nothing arguably is as important today in the political economy of development as an adequate recognition of the leadership of women. And this is Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate. And Hillary Rodham Clinton has called women's leadership the unfinished business of the 21st century. The forum will begin with a thoughtful message from our own Penn faculty, Zaid Rad Al Hussein, who was the former High Commissioner for Human Rights.
My dear Rangita, I'm so sorry I can't be with you this lunchtime because you are a true human rights champion, both within our Penn community and as a member of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. My regret is made even worse by the many friends on this panel, Irina, Nicole, Seema, and Payam, who, together with the other distinguished panelists participating in this Women, Law and Leadership Forum, represent a formidable group, and this will be quite a show. And all in the presence, among others, of our Penn students from the Women, Law and Leadership class and the International Women and Human Rights class. CEDAW is, as you all know, working on General Comment 40, centered on women's leadership, and given what we heard both on the 22nd of February this year and since then, it will be a comment that will change the way we view women's participation. It will not fix its sights on presence alone. Rather, it will reveal a broader expression of what presence means, should mean, and by doing so, define not just the height of the roof, but encourage that roof to move further upwards, to go where it ought to be, to lift it where it's in any case going, but needs facilitation in the form of this clarification, this comment, to ease its passage. Led by CEDAW member Nicole Ameline, the former Minister of Women's Affairs of France, who is with us today, the comment will, in the minds of many of us, be a breakthrough. And like all rights and general comments that follow them, it will excite reactions, mostly supportive, but some against. What will not be uncertain at all is the determination of the drafters to apply their knowledge and legal skills most professionally in charting what they believe to be the correct interpretation of the word presence and the context in which it needs to be better understood. Your exchange today will assist them in enabling it to happen. I bid you all a successful exchange and thank you for having me.
So this conversation will elucidate the role of women and women's presence in leadership. I'm honored first and foremost to welcome the Honorable Nicole Ameline, member of the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women's Convention, and my very dear and cherished colleague. She was the former Minister of the Sea and Minister of Women's Affairs, France, and she helped introduce the parity principle in the French Constitution. And once again, she's rewriting history as the leader and the architect of the UN CEDAW's General Recommendation 40 on women's leadership. I'm also honored to welcome the Honorable Irina Bokova, the first woman former Secretary General of UNESCO. She was the first woman to head UNESCO. She was also the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Bulgaria, and she led the UN Security Council Resolution 2347 on the destruction of cultural heritage as a crime against humanity. In 2016, she was the leading candidate to be the first woman Secretary General of the United Nations. In its 78-year-old August history, the United Nations is yet to be led by a woman. because Irina is joining us all the way from Uzbekistan, and it is after 10 p.m. With Nicole's permission, I am going to ask Irina to lead us because of the lateness in the time and because she's probably the furthest away from us. So, Irina, what I want you to do is to speak briefly about the role that you played in leading UNESCO and the way in which it changed history. When a woman leads, it helps to shape a new history for our times. As the Secretary General, you were very famously known to be standing between the ISIS and the World Heritage. And that was the way The Guardian defined and described you. And your work on the Security Council resolution came in the aftermath of the destruction of the Banyan Buddhas by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And a breakthrough in your campaign came when you visited northern Iraq in 2014 and met the people of the Yazidi minority who were being persecuted by the ISIS. And you used the term cultural cleansing. You created this new term to describe what was happening to them. And you said, what are Yazidis if they are uprooted from a place where they have been living for centuries? And you asked, you destroy the temples, you take away what they have, you enslave half of them, you push them somewhere else, you deprive them of their identity. So today, the GR40 is about the identity of women leaders. And in several parts of the world, women face barriers to their identities as leaders. They are prevented from their due place, from their rightful place in leadership. Irina?
Thank you very much, Rangita. Thank you for inviting me to be once again. I have been in your program years ago. It was before COVID, and I'm happy to join again, albeit via Zoom. And particularly to be with my dear friend Nicola Melin, whom I respect very much. She knows that. We have been together on many occasions to make a strong advocacy for women's rights, for equality, and she really is a formidable member of CEDAW, which still is considered to be the
Uzbekistan. I feel this. It's
They're
us.
all frozen. Yeah. They're all frozen.
Oh no. Do you need to call IT?
If it doesn't work now.
All days today. And Uzbekistan works.
I had to be very responsible and very true to the mandate, the organization, and also to the moment. And the moment was difficult, as you mentioned. It was the moment of extremism that was advancing in some countries in Africa, in the Middle East, the horrendous, horrific destruction of heritage, our common heritage of humanity. And I decided that I should take indeed the lead by working with the Security Council members for the first time. When I approached them, they were I would say at the beginning, a bit of a surprise why a Director General of UNESCO should go to the Security Council. And it was really a hard work to convince them that the destruction of heritage goes hand in hand with the humanitarian crisis, with the persecution of people you did mention, Yazidis, and also to mobilize the public opinion broadly and the world around this cause. And my first, of course, idea, my first decision was to go immediately to Iraq. I went there and there was 60 kilometers, ISIS was 60 kilometers away. I went to the refugee camps, I met with the minorities, I went to the University of Baghdad, I met with young people, and when I came back I said we really have to do something stronger with the security community, and this is how we started working on Resolution 2347, which I truly believe that it made history, because for the first time the Security Council made this strong link that destruction of heritage is indeed a crime against humanity, but it is also strongly linked to peace and security. And then I went back to Iraq 6 months later, and I went back again to the University of Baghdad to launch a campaign, Unite for Heritage, with the young students from Baghdad University. And we were discussing a lot because the easiest thing for me would have been, you know, to stay in Paris, to stay in my office and to launch this campaign. But I said, I have to go there. I have to be with young Iraqis. I have to listen to them. I want to be with them so that they show the same commitment, the same rejection of these extremist ideologies. And I believe through this, it was not only giving them hope, not just being with them in solidarity, but also to pass a message around the world. And I was very happy that just a year later, it was, because it was an online campaign, Unite for Heritage, and there were millions of people, mostly young people, who shared their experiences, who uploaded their messages, who were really united for the common heritage, for protection of the common heritage of humanity. And I think that what nowadays is very much in need, it is indeed leadership. I believe we women can lead. Maybe we lead differently. We are not the same, and I don't say that we are better than men, not at all. But I think we women, we work in teams. We listen. We are showing probably leadership in another manner. And I have always worked in teams, and I have always supported women. I believe in women supporting women. When I entered UNESCO, when I was elected at UNESCO, women in leadership positions in the organizations were 23%. When I left, we were at parity. And I did not just appoint women because there were women, there are plenty of competent women there. But you have to make an effort, you have to encourage them, you have to support them, sometimes you have to mentor them so that they assume this responsibility and they move forward in their careers. So I really believe that when women believe in themselves, when they have really the right support, where they're put in such leadership position, they can do the job. So my message in this program, because I know that how much you, Rangita, care about equality, you believe strongly in women leadership, and you have been working with the young women. We need more young women to aspire for such leadership position. And I would say that you can be a leader not only when you are head of an agency or when you are in such high position. You can be a leader in your community. You can be a leader in your NGO. You can be a leader among your kins. You may take leadership as leadership in ideas. Nowadays, if you have the right ideas, you believe in them, and you can mobilize around about yourself people. I think this is truly important. And I would like to end with something that Jurangit also mentioned, that in the 78 years of the existence of the United Nations, there has never been a woman Secretary General. It's regrettable. There have been only 4 women President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Can you imagine? 78 years, 78 General Assemblies of the United Nations, and only 4 women presidents. I think it's a shame for the humanity and for the United Nations. Now, after my bid, and also of friends of mine, women that were there, Susanna Malcora, Helen Clark, excellent leaders, also women leaders, we decided to unite the 3 of us, and we launched a platform initially. Now we formalize it as an organization, Women Leaders. We gathered, we invited, nowadays there are around 60 women that have been taken high positions in the United Nations, Assistant Secretary General, members or leaders of agencies on the field and otherwise, and he created this platform in order to advocate for women leadership in the United Nations, for the women's agenda in the United Nations in the first place, because we are seeing nowadays that there are setbacks. And I never thought that there will be setbacks on many, many of the issues. I'm sure that Nicole shares this view of mine. But I also want to make a very strong advocacy that the future elections, there will be a woman. There are plenty of women, wonderful women leaders that can aspire for the job, and I think we need to unite around this idea. I don't say that there are not excellent also men that can lead, not at all, but we really need to push this agenda. We really need to pass this strong message of women leadership, because then it will trigger down to national politics and to the others. So I once again thank you for inviting me to say just a few words here. I'm sure that Nicole will have a wonderful sharing of her experience, of her passion, I would say, because she dedicated her life to this cause, this wonderful cause, and also to congratulate you, Rangita, because you are relentless in your advocacy for women's rights. So thank you once again for this opportunity, and I wish you a wonderful session today.
Irina, we are inspired by this panoramic sweep. We are inspired by this panoramic sweep of your personal and political journey in leadership, both at UNESCO and when you had the courage and the conviction to run as the first woman secretary of UN Secretary General, because that would shape and redefine the history of women for all time. So thank you for that courage and the conviction. We were behind you, as we were behind Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who also ran with Irina for the same post as one of the first trailblazers to run for office as the Secretary General of the United Nations. You also spoke about the ways in which you closed the gender gap at UNESCO. And that itself shows that when a woman leads, that she is not just a woman leader, but a women's leader. There's a distinction between being a woman leader and a women's leader. You led for other women in closing the gender gap at leadership at UNESCO. And the difference that you made as a woman leader was what you did in terms of creating a new Security Council resolution, which was probably a breakthrough resolution, one that met with a lot of challenge. So thank you for the way in which you have redefined humankind and the way we respond to civilization and culture. I'm next going to the most important voice today, which is the leader of General Recommendation 40 and the architect of this important general recommendation, which is going to change the way in which we think of the future. Nicole, I'm proud to be your colleague on the committee on the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. I am proud to bring you to my students. They are the next generation of leaders, and this is probably one of the few consultations where we have a critical mass of the next generation of women and men in one room. And to some extent, they are a majority, because when I think of the men and women in this room, on the screen, who have shaped history, I'm also looking at the men and women who will continue to shape that history that you have made. So, Nicole, to you.
Yes, thank you a lot, dear Rangita. It's a great honor for me to participate, of course, in this event, and I would like to say to your students that they have one of the most brilliant experts on women's rights and equality in the world with you, and I'm sure that they are very proud to have you as professor. And I would like also to say to Irina how I have admired her experience, capacity to change the world too, and to move history forward. And thank you, Irina, for all you have done for women, and you continue, and I'm very happy about that. Just to start, Rangita, I would like to say that I launched the idea of the committee's candidacy for the Nobel Prize. I think that it was 10 years ago, and I was chair of the committee, and I have considered that the committee the CEDAW committee could be also probably awarded by a Nobel Prize for its capacity to change the status of women. But maybe it could be also a new idea to support. Just a few words about this wonderful step that we propose with the GR40. I think, and I do think, more and more that it is probably a unique opportunity for millions of women to be represented and in the different decision-making process in the places of power, and to respond to the situation that we face today. We speak about de facto exclusion because we note, we observe that only 25% of parliamentarians are women. And it is really unacceptable anymore because it is a sort of political apartheid, if I can say that. Because really, this situation is directly linked to the patriarchal structure of the decision-making system historically. And it's totally spectacular to note that during decades and during centuries, the situation has been the same. And today, despite many efforts, despite success stories, globally, the evolution is very slow, random, and too often regressive. And our view, and I thank you so much, dear Ranjita, for your support. You are wonderful. And I love the idea to have you on board in the CEDAW committee because we need your energy, your brilliant analysis. And with the support of the CEDAW, with the support of UN Women, with the support of IPU, with the support of a lot of countries, because fortunately we have today more than 55 countries supporting this new recommendation. I'm convinced that we have a sort of probably historical opportunity to change the system. And it is this systemic approach that we recommend. Because we don't consider that now women have a problem with leadership. They are leaders. The problems is that they have no access to the decision-making system. And Irina was totally right to remember that, to recall us that during decades there is no general secretary as women. It has not been the case for many reasons, but first of all because the system is patriarchal. And we have to give an example in all the international organizations, as well as in the public sphere and private sphere. And it is one of the most interest of this new general recommendation is that we cover private and public sector, because we consider that parity has to become a universal norm and it has to be considered as a response to the challenges that we face nowadays. For instance, climate change, migrations, 2030 agenda, but also digital transition and energy and water crisis. All these challenges call for a new response, a global new response. And only a global impetus in the world can create a new paradigm. And it is our goal to create a new paradigm shift on parity.
Nicole?
And
Nicole?
also, sorry.
Sorry, Nicole, Dr. Seema Sama is also facing a conflict. She was gracious enough to join us when she had a conflict. So, Nicole, since this is your program, you're hosting this program, I will humbly ask you to pause and have Seema, Dr. Sama speak, and then you will continue. Dr. Seema Sama served as the Vice President of Afghanistan. She also served as the Minister of Women's Affairs of Afghanistan. She's the first and the inaugural chairperson of the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. And she had to leave Afghanistan because of death threats, because the ways in which she has faced so many death threats, that she fled Afghanistan not because she wanted to be safe, but she wanted her ideas to be safe. You wanted to safeguard the ideas of a free and just Afghanistan, Seema. It was not because you thought of yourself first, but because of you thought of Afghanistan first and yourself second. You continue to lead in so many different ways. You were appointed by the UN Secretary General to his high-level panel on internal displacement. You were also the Special Rapporteur on Sudan on behalf of the Secretary General as well as the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I wanted to just share with my students one facet of your leadership. As a leader in Afghanistan, you have not only faced death threats, but you have continued to take a courageous stand for women's empowerment. Even before the high offices that you have held, you served as a medical doctor in the refugee camps in Pakistan, the Afghan refugee camps in Pakistan, where you smuggled in birth control pills for the refugee women. So you continue to show that kind of tenacity and the spirit of courage. And that intrepid courage continues to serve all the Afghan women who are in exile around the world. Dr. Seema Sama, what I want you to do is to speak to us about that leadership in a time of crisis. You know, we talk about leadership in public service, but rarely do we talk about leadership in war, leadership in conflict, and leadership in a time of enormously profound crisis as we see in Afghanistan. Dr. Seema?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Ranjita. And I'm sorry, Nicole, it's my pleasure to be in a panel with so many distinguished, powerful men and women. So I don't want to exclude our two male panelists here. I think as a mother, as a woman, we naturally have the capacity and capability to be a leader. But as Nicole, you already said that we are living in a world with apartheid, and we currently in Afghanistan, we are living under gender apartheid regime. And absolutely. Unfortunately, it's a new phenomena and new issues in this century that nobody have seen it. So what I think is that is needed, one, I think, on the conflict situation or in the, let's say, disaster situation, either man-made or natural-made, is the mothers who always take the leadership. I mean, you could see easily when they run, and if they become IDPs, if there's a conflict, when the people runs to save their life, men run alone, usually. It's the mother who take the care of the baby. I mean, usually they have two, one in their shoulder and the other one on their hand running with. So that itself is a leadership. But what is very unfortunate is that that role is not acknowledged by the so-called patriarchal society and patriarchal environment. That is one. Number two, I think we always talk about the United Nations. I mean, it's 75th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights in United Nations, as you all mentioned. And that, since the establishment of the United Nations in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which insists on equality, we have not had a female leader, a female Secretary General. And we should fight for that. And we should be united and stand for that. I think it's really important to look at the situation in need of the people from a female lens and female feminist approach, because we see the issues differently. As Ranjita said, for example, in the whole program for the Afghan refugees in Pakistan, I lived in Pakistan for 17 years as a refugee and I worked as a medical doctor. Nobody was willing to fund and support reproductive rights, in particularly contraception. And this is the case still today, after 40 years and 45 years, again in Afghanistan. And what's happened? People become more poor. It will be more young, unemployment, uneducated men without job, and they would be used by the criminal forces, either the extremist radical Islamic forces or gang criminal forces. I mean, the radical Islamists is also criminal, but more gang, like the smugglers, the smuggler of the people, the smuggler of the opium and other hashish and so on from Afghanistan at the hand of those people, including the smuggling of weapons, which is also something that we need to do. The other point that I would like to mention is that when you look at the overall power and superpower on militarization, how many women are involved? Luckily, no, not much. We are not designing atomic bomb. I hope the female physicists try to use the physics knowledge for more peaceful environment and situation and development programs rather than making bombs. And also during this COVID issue, we saw that the countries who were leading by females were more successful on combating COVID or this pandemic. And that shows itself that the women, if they given chance, if we have enough self-confidence ourselves and given chance and support in our communities, we will be able to change the environment. The final point that I would like to mention, my sisters and brothers and Ranjita in your class, that the situation on women's rights, and including CEDAW and all the other conventions which insist on equality of women and inclusion of women, there is still a very little improvement. I give you an example. The Security Council in 2000, the 1325 resolution was passed by Security Council. And in 2020, when the Taliban and Americans signed the Doha Agreement and somehow hand over Afghanistan back to the Taliban, there's no word on that 4-page agreement. And again, Security Council passed anonymously and supported that peace agreement. It is not right. And I would like the other women around the world to stand with us and to push for criminalization and acknowledgement of the gender apartheid as international crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan. Because it's not a problem only for Afghan women, it is a problem for humanity. And I stop here, I'm so sorry I have to run, but it was really tremendous pleasure to be with you all, and thank you so much. Then bring the test, please. Don't let us
Dr.
to the
Seema,
Taliban.
Dr. Seema, we
Thank you.
stand with you. We stand with you, and that is why we wanted to honor you by you lending your voice to this general recommendation of women's leadership, because standing up for women of Afghanistan is part of the leadership of women around the world. That we abdicate our role as women leaders if we do not stand with our sisters in Afghanistan. And you embody the spirit of the women of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Nicole, I'm going to come back to you since I cut you short because Seema had a pressing obligation. Nicole, I do want you to continue with your presentation of the framework of the new general recommendation that is going to be part of the international normative structure. Nicole, yes.
Thank you, and it was wonderful to hear from Seema. Yes, I would like to just to precise that this GR is, of course, part of the mandate of the CEDAW committee, and each 2 years we have a sort of focus on an emerging or pressing issue. And this topic is particularly timely because, as I said, it's not only a response to a fundamental right, but also to a promise that has been constantly reiterated since of course, the convention, the CEDAW convention, but also the Beijing Declaration, but also in the 2030 agenda, in the resolution 1325, without having been ever delivered. And today we consider that it is something absolutely urgent. It's a urgent matter, and we have not to negotiate anymore. We have to recognize that parity is an absolute priority for all state parties, and one of our views is to integrate, of course, parity into the constitution, but we can also imagine, we were speaking about the resolution, the 1325 resolution, we can imagine to monitor much more the implementation of this resolution. We can imagine also to create new indicators, a new ranking in the world, to have a better evaluation of parity implementation in all countries, because today we see that, for instance, 5 countries have parity parliament. But first, it's not enough, and it can be very, very random, and we cannot accept. I insist upon this point. We have a young generation in this room, and I think that we cannot wait anymore for a sort of justice and balance. Absolutely. So, during the 2 next years, we are going to elaborate, and in a very public and open way, this big project.
So this is the pressing challenge, and we cannot afford to wait, because as you said, it will take over, the World Economic Forum has argued that it will take over 100 years to close the gender gap. Exactly. And that the closing of the gender gap, when that does happen, as McKinsey Global has argued, will contribute $128 trillion to the global GDP. And that is why it is so important for us to have global icons such as Professor Sanjay Sama, President of the Asian University for Business, which is an MIT and the Central Bank of Malaysia's collaboration, who also serves as the Fred Ford Flowers and Daniel Ford Flowers Professor of Mechanical Engineering, the former Vice President of MIT, and the father of Internet of Things. He's known around the world as an innovator, as a leading innovator, as the father of Internet of Things. And Sanjay, you're also first and foremost a champion of women in the innovation industry and in STEM education. So as someone who is part of probably the most important institution on innovation and technology in the world, MIT, can you tell us what you have done and what MIT and other institutions can do to accelerate women's leadership in business, in innovation, in the startup economy? Now we know that women-led startups receive just 2.3 of venture funding in the United States. So there is this leadership gap in the innovation economy, despite the fact that Ada Lovelace was the author of the first computer program, Lord Byron's daughter, nonetheless. So Dr. Sama, Professor Sama, President Sama, can you tell us how you think this innovation gap, I not only call it a gender gap, but an innovation gap, because of the ways in which women are left out of innovation, it creates it impoverishes innovation. Sanjay.
Thank you, Rangita. Thank you for everything you do. I think it's inspiring, and for the extraordinary panelists here. Very moving to hear their descriptions of the problems, but also of what they've done. They're very inspiring. So I am a professor, and I'm a university leader, and I'm a technologist. I think that we need to appreciate that a time when the world faces extraordinary challenges, both in terms of technology, in terms of global issues, whether it's the SDGs, particularly climate change, but also in terms of just the talent we require to take on these challenges. Actually, we are completely, I think, understaffed. We have not prepared ourselves. It is shocking that half of our intellect is not included, pretty much, in vast majorities of the world. And this is, to me, something that we need to sort of galvanize action, opinion, and execution on. The field of engineering has been very male-dominated. A lot of climate change is the result of engineering, it's because of CO2 emissions, etc. In fact, the language of engineering is itself just, in many respects, blatantly sexist. For example, in material science, we have something called hysteresis. So when a material behaves differently, the way it's not in a way that's different than it's supposed to behave, it's called hysteresis. And that comes from hysteria, and that's essentially a pejorative term, gendered. And we use it. In fact, today I read a paper where we use the word hysteresis. And that's just the beginning. There's a whole bunch of language, and not just in engineering, but broadly speaking. I've stopped saying the word chairman. I mean, it took me some time, but I've stopped. I just said chair or chairperson. But it's just so imbued in our culture, this gender. And then to make matters worse, a lot of expertise is transferred as implicit knowledge from peer to peer. So, for example, if you work in a technology, the people around you learn by watching you. It's a peer-to-peer system. And a lot of it is not explicit, it's implicit. You watch each other, you sort of learn from each other. And the result of all that is that we have pools of expertise that are only spread amongst men. And the place where this is most explicit is startups. The idea of startups, the way you do a startup, is there are no rules, they're instincts. When do you fundraise? How do you manage the situation? And the sort of the cartoonish way to capture it is the Silicon Valley bro culture. And it's no surprise, in fact, that a lot of startups are funded by men, because men have hung out, especially given that engineering is so male-dominated, men hang out with men and they do startups with men. And the culture of startups with this special knowledge only spreads amongst men. Now, and then the venture capitalists are a lot of men, so it sort of creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. A classic example of that is PayPal. PayPal, there's actually a very well-known thing called the PayPal Mafia. The founders of PayPal created a bunch of companies, and they all worked together, they learned from each other, and they created the mafia. So I want to tell you the names of the people who came from PayPal. Peter Thiel. Peter, a man, founded PayPal, then he went on to found, which company? Anyway, he founded a bunch of Palantir, the other company. Max Levchin, he's the chief technology of PayPal. Elon Musk, you know, he was at PayPal and then he went on to found Tesla and SpaceX and Neuralink and so on. David Sachs came from PayPal, founded Yammer. Scott Bannister, Roloff Botha, the top venture capitalist. He's the head of Sequoia Capital. Steve Chen went on to found YouTube. Reid Hoffman founded LinkedIn and then became an early investor in Facebook and Aviary. Ken Howery founded something called Founders Fund. Chad Hurley founded YouTube. Eric Jackson founded something called CapLinked. Javed Karim, another man, it's a Muslim name, a man, YouTube. I can go on and on. There is not a single woman there. Keith Rebois became a venture capitalist. Jack Selby, Premal Shah. There's some diversity. There's Asian and white men. There's some diversity, not a lot, but there's not a single woman. And this shows you two things. The fact that the act of creating startups from one company, PayPal, the fact that so many people came out of it means that it is in fact like something that you can learn. It's not a God-given gift, because the probability would not work that all these people end up in one company. It means they learn from each other. So the good news is it can be learned. The bad news is the only people who learned were the people in the cloud, and they were all men. And this is, I think, a real challenge that we have to confront going forward, because we face climate change, we face shortage of water, we face, unfortunately, potential disasters in agriculture, on and on, education crisis. And we have created pools of expertise, and we have created circles of transfer of expertise that are essentially a single gender. And this is not sustainable, because leaving aside the morality of it, leaving aside doing the right thing, just bad for the world. So I will stop now and just say that I'm so pleased that you, Rangita, as always, have taken leadership in this. I'm very moved by the rest of the panelists and really sort of inspired to hear them. But I do think this has become something that we need to take on as a societal change, if nothing else, just to save the planet. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Bravo.
Bravo. Thank you, Sanjay. As you know, you're a personal ally, but you're also this champion of women in leadership in the STEM as well as the innovation industries. But the ways in which you have shared this narrative is so profoundly important. You read out this kind of honor, is kind of like a list of the men who part of the honor roll in technologies. And the honor roll consists of all men. Where are the women? And it is not that, Ada Lovelace was not the pioneer. It is not that Marie Curie was the first person to ever win the Nobel Prize twice. So it is not that women have not led breakthrough changes for humanity. It is just that women have been erased from that leadership position that is a self-perpetuating cycle. And I will talk about it in my own presentation, where I call this a critical mass of women, which is a critical mass theory is borrowed from nuclear physics. And the critical mass creates a tipping point. And that tipping point then creates this kind of chain reaction. So it is important to have a critical mass of women in power and in leadership, in the sciences, in public leadership, in security, for that chain reaction to take place. Because it is something that nuclear physics has taught us, that it's only when there is a critical mass does that systemic change occur. And this is a connection that a Harvard professor, Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, has also defined as the critical mass theory for women in corporate leadership. So, Professor Sama, we are in your debt because you are taking MIT around the world in your leadership in Malaysia, heading the Asian School of Business, which is, as I said, a collaboration between the central banks of Asia and MIT. You are training the next generation of women central bankers and male central bankers because that allyship is pivotal to women's leadership. Thank you. Thank you. And now we have one of the most renowned human rights lawyers in the world joining us. He is already a legend among my students in all of my classes. And Payam, because of the legendary nature of your work, I will take a moment to speak a little bit. You are currently the ICC Prosecutor's Special Advisor on Genocide. You were previously legal advisor to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia at The Hague. You were the Special Advisor to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. You have served as legal counsel in cases before the International Court of Justice and the ICC, the European Court of Human Rights, the Supreme Court of Canada, and the United States. I don't think there's a single human rights lawyer who has argued as many cases as you have before the ICC, the ICJ, the European Court of Human Rights, and served as a legal advisor in every ad hoc tribunal, including the International Criminal Court. You have been the counsel for some of the biggest cases before international tribunals. Eritrea and Ethiopia Claims Commission, the allegations of ethnic cleansing in South Ossetia, which was a case between Georgia versus Russia. You were a representative of the Rohingya in the Rohingya genocide case, Gambia versus Myanmar. And you continue to be a champion for the women of Afghanistan in the case on gender apartheid and gender persecution. So although this is an ongoing issue, I like how you are at the forefront of these legal strategies to help the women of Afghanistan. Your book, In Search of a Better World, A Human Rights Odyssey, was made into a documentary by CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And this was a book, and your public presentation as part of the Massey Lecture was one of those pivotal moments in the world because it mapped these human rights crises of the 20th and the 21st century and your own role in that. But most of all, you paid tribute to a woman, a young woman leader, to who you owe your leadership in human rights. So I want you to speak about how this woman leader, this young woman leader, inspired you to be part of change in the world. Payam?
Thank you very much, Rangita. You are far too generous than I deserve in your kind introduction, and I'm very pleased to be on this panel with such distinguished speakers and with your students. When we speak about leadership of women, of course there are many different contexts. We can speak about leadership in the business world, in the political sphere, and what have you. And my earliest encounter with the leadership of women was in the trenches, was in the grassroots, to see the astonishing resilience of women in the face of violence, in the face of persecution. And the person that you referred to, of course, was Mona Mahmoudnejad, who was my contemporary in Iran. I left Iran as a child with my parents around the time of the 1979 revolution that led to the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And of course, the Islamic Revolution was based on not simply authoritarianism and violence,
but in particular a misogynist ideology that expressed political power through the domination, subordination, and control of women, something which it does to this day, as we saw last year in the remarkable, unprecedented feminist revolution under the banner of Women, Life, Liberty, following the murder of Mahsa Amini, 22-year-old woman who was beaten to death for failing to observe the hijab rules properly. So it was in this context, as a 16-year-old in Canada, an immigrant child, trying to fit in, trying to be Canadian, whatever that means, that I heard that my contemporary Mona Mahmoud-Nejad and 9 other women who belong to the Baha'i religious minority in Iran, persecuted by the fundamentalists, in part because of the belief of the Baha'is in the equality of men and women, that Mona and 9 other women had been hanged in a polo field in the city of Shiraz on June 18th of 1983. And of course, the first question that came to me was, why her and not me? The only difference between us was that my family had the good fortune of coming to Canada, while hers had to remain behind. But beyond that, to me, it was a source of profound reflection as to how a 16-year-old girl who was a high school student, whose crime was writing an essay in which she demanded her rights, would be subject to months of torture and would then be executed, but how she could remain defiant throughout this unspeakable violence against her. So I didn't necessarily see Mona as a victim. I saw her as a heroine, as a champion, and a sort of exponent of an astonishing resilience. And when I compared that with my North American life and the kind of consumerist culture and the banal concerns that people had, it really turned my world upside down and began this journey of trying to understand both how it is that someone could be so cruel and vicious as to put a 16-year-old girl to death simply for speaking truth to power, but also to be inspired by her extraordinary resistance against this act of violence. And that was the beginning of my journey, which ultimately led to my human rights career. And through the experiences that I've had in various war zones around the world, in various refugee camps, and the site of really a terrible, unspeakable misery, I've also seen time and again the leadership of women in the trenches, the leadership of genocide survivors who, having lost everything, still go on demanding justice against overwhelming odds, reclaiming their humanity despite the terrible violence that has been visited upon them. In Srebrenica, in the former Yugoslavia, I met the mothers of Srebrenica, who gathered together at the site of the mass graves in search of the remains of their children. And it was absolutely heartbreaking to see any mother who has lost her child, let alone under these circumstances of gratuitous violence. But the mothers of Srebrenica became iconic because the demand of a mother who has lost her child for justice is something that speaks to the core of what it means to be a human being. It speaks to the core of those who are the givers of life, demanding answers for the extinction of the lives of their children. In Rwanda, I met my amazing sister Esther Mujawayo, who, having lost 200 members of her extended family and her husband, rescued her 3 children. My dear friend Siba Samar was speaking about how it is women that in these circumstances of violence and displacement are the protectors of children. And Esther was running through the streets of Kigali in the middle of the genocide with 3 little girls who she miraculously managed to rescue. And she went on, after this horrific violence, to establish an organization for the widows of Rwanda, which has helped thousands of women to reclaim their humanity and to rehabilitate themselves following the 1994 genocide. One can think in an earlier time in 1977 of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, who went in front of the presidential palace in front of an incredibly violent military junta, defiant, demanding to know the whereabouts of their children who had been disappeared. So time and again I have seen that when all else is lost, more often than not, it is women who become the leaders. You know, Rangita, my experience with the extraordinary women leaders, the Shanta Mohila, the women of peace at the Kutupalong refugee camp, the biggest refugee camp in the world on the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh. One of the most unforgettable moments I had was to see these 3 refugees travel to The Hague for this hearing before the International Court of Justice. And you can imagine how intimidating it is for someone who is a farmer from a small village in a Rakhine state in Myanmar, who's displaced in a refugee camp, who's never been on an airplane, who's never seen an elevator or an escalator, to come and attend a hearing in the Peace Palace in The Hague before the judges of the court. And the presence of these 3 women was such a powerful reminder that genocide is not an abstraction, that behind every victim there is a name, a mother and a father and a brother and a sister. And I remember after the hearing at which Aung San Suu Kyi was made to answer for her role in being an apologist for this horrific genocidal violence, the women saying that now we too feel that we are human beings. So I could go on and on, but I really think that sometimes it is in the most unlikely places, not in the elite circles of the UN Secretary Generals and the boardrooms of major corporations, although that is also very important. But I think that this grassroots leadership itself challenges us to redefine the meaning of leadership. And this is leadership from the bottom up. And in my estimation, it is that leadership that ultimately will allow for a grassroots, meaningful and lasting transformation of the patterns and structures of violence which have plagued us for so long. So once again, thank you very much for your kind invitation, for your generosity, and really I want to pay tribute to all those women that don't have the luxury of being a guest lecturer at your class, but who have inspired me throughout my life.
Thank you, Pam, for that moving, touching tribute to both Mona and the women who came after her. So before I turn to the most important part of our class, which is to hear from a next generation, from a new generation of women leaders, I'm going to take 5 minutes to map some of the issues that we've been talking in the class, but also some of the issues that I think are important to GR40. As you know, Nicole, India passed its first quota law just 2 weeks ago, recognizing a critical mass of women in the lower house of parliament. And this took 73 years in the making. That is why we need the GR40 to accelerate change, because no country can afford to wait for 73 years. Now, the view of a critical mass as a tipping point was something that I've talked before, and it was recognized by Professor Rosabeth Moss-Cantor of Harvard Business School. And we, in the political arena, have adopted this view of a critical mass theory or a tipping point to argue that when women are represented in a critical mass, a chemical reaction occurs, and that leads to a chain reaction, very similar to the critical mass theory in nuclear physics. A critical mass of women in leadership leads to that chain reaction. So what happens? I want to put this forward. So what happens when this chain reaction takes place, when women are in positions of power? I have identified 6 elements. 1, it increases production, ensuring equal decision making for women farmers, augmented maize yields by 17% in Ghana. In India and Nepal, having women leaders manage forests significantly improved conservation outcomes, and it improved women's property rights and advanced productivity and participation by 18%. Now, secondly, the critical mass has a substantive impact on policy. Reducing gender inequality in leadership results in more women-friendly legislation. And what we see is that Costa Rican parliament, when it adopted a quota and reached a critical mass of over 30%, the parliament passed the Protection of Adolescent Mothers Law, which was promulgated to provide free health services and education to young women and adolescent mothers. In Tanzania, a gender quota was enacted so as to ensure that women who had no less than 20% in the seats of parliament, and because of their presence, an amendment to the Land Act granted women's equal access to land, loans, and credit. Third is a more, I think, an intergenerational impact of having women in a critical mass of leadership. And that is the role model effect. Having a woman in a seat of power can be transformative and can help inspire peers and future generations of women. Studies in India show that when fathers are exposed to female leaders, fathers are more likely to send their girls to schools and to retain their girls in school longer when they come from villages that are led by women in local government. So in short, fathers have greater aspirations for their daughters in communities where women leaders are more visible and female role models impact fathers' attitude towards their girls. Now the critical mass of women can also change a national narrative. Indira Gandhi, the former Prime Minister of India, the first woman Prime Minister of India, spoke of the liberation of women in inaugurating All India Women's Conference in the 1980s, and she borrowed from the president of Mills College in the United States when she said, "It is time to look at the thoughtless use of stereotypes." And Sanjay did the same, using the word like chairman, using the words like hysteria, are very much part of the stereotypes that are part of our national narratives. And Indira Gandhi said, man as leader, woman as follower, man as strength, woman as weak. This is a cosmography that has brought us to man as aggressor. So I think, when Seema talked about, women have not been part of, the nuclear bomb production, I think that is what the man as aggressor has brought us to. And then finally, the ways in which women in leadership can change democracy. The Norwegian Nobel Committee chairman made a clarion call to action in 2011 when awarding the Peace Prize to women on the front lines of peace building. He said, "We cannot achieve democracy and lasting peace in the world unless women obtain the same opportunities as men to lead." So this is what happens. This is the impact, because as scholars, as academics, we really have to measure what difference does difference make when we create a call to action for a general recommendation that calls for leadership. We need to measure what happens when women are in leadership positions. And I end with a story from President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of Liberia, and another Nobelist. When she was appointed president, Bertha Amanor, a Liberian woman working in a women's NGO, said, because Johnson Sirleaf is in the big house of the president. If you look today where the big house is, a woman is sitting there. And if she's there, we can be leaders here. Men, listen up. We no longer can be beaten by you because we are leaders. So it is that sense of how it has a trickle-down effect on the grassroots and the ways in which women leaders can inspire change. So with that, look at what difference makes in terms of measuring the impact of women leaders. I want to look at the next generation of leaders and call upon them to share with us their own thoughts about the GR40. So I'm going to first ask Melissa. Melissa,
women as
would you
leaders.
like to come here?
This is not the case, and often we maintain this vision of women as victims.
In her article, Why Women Leadership is the Cause of Our Time, our professor has shown how impactful it is to have women at the table. When women are in spaces where decisions are being made and laws are being created, women's issues are brought to the forefront and change can actually happen. As her article states, it makes sense not only from a justice perspective, but from an economic perspective and an equality perspective for both men and women. In the past, conversations have focused heavily on anti-discrimination when thinking about the barriers facing women in all spheres of life. However, by shifting our mindsets to a leadership framework, we shift from the negative to the positive and begin focusing on the development of women and what they have to offer, not solely on the harms that they faced in the past. Politics, like sports, can serve as a metaphor for how women are treated in other sectors. Once women are recognized as leaders that we are and given a chance to lead, patriarchal structures can begin to shift and change can be made. I've personally interned with senators and congressmen in the U.S. Senate and most recently served as a law clerk on the Senate Judiciary Committee. As a young woman at such a transformative part of my career, seeing women, and especially women with intersectional identities, lead has opened my eyes to what's possible for myself and for my peers. Women leaders challenge norms, drive awareness, and help create a more equitable place for future generations. However, women still lead in significantly lower numbers than men, let alone women with intersectional identities, and it's noticeable, not just among those elected, but on the staff of those members as well. When the majority of leaders are still men, it's apparent that we still need to support women to create change in spaces of leadership. I look forward to the day that women and other marginalized groups lead in equal and even greater numbers. That change continues with my generation and the leaders in this class. Thank you so much to the leaders on our panel today for their relentless work for the next generation. Their work has made our paths easier and inspires us.
Nicole, as I said, I brought in the best for the last. I kept the best for the last because I knew that if there was inspiration in this room, it would come for my next generation of leaders. Melissa, this was so moving because of the ways in which you framed this, but also the way in which you brought your own experiences. Melissa hopes to run for office. And this is why I think this GR40 is so pivotal, because it provides a way in which it systematizes, it normalizes her campaign for leadership. Because it says that women's rightful place is in leadership position. And that is why I thought it was so important for also you, Nicole, to be connected to the next generation of leaders, because I want them to shape this international normative framework. Next, I'm going to ask the wonderful Phoebe to speak of her own work as one of the pioneers in the mining industry in Ghana. She is a lawyer, she's a Ghanaian lawyer who studied for her master's degree here at the law school at the University of Pennsylvania.
Professor Rangita, first, I would like to thank you for providing the platform for our voices to be heard. I believe General Recommendation 40 would have a great impact on the next generation of women. So having our voices heard in this process, I think is very, very important. and most importantly, the diversity of the voices present here in this room is particularly inspiring. So historically, like Professor Rangita said, I am in the mining industry. Historically, women have been underrepresented in the mining industry, and currently, women are still underrepresented in the mining industry. According to the ILO report, out of about 214 million people work in the mining industry. Out of that, 85% of them are men, which means that we have only 15% of women employed in the mining industry. What you would realize is that the deficit in the representation actually reflects magnificently on the senior level. So if you have 15% of women employed in the mining industry, what do you expect to see in the senior level positions? So among the S&P 500 companies, there are only about 30 women CEOs. Out of these 30 women, not even one is from the mining industry. So it's about time we accept that the mining industry has a gender diversity problem. And it is lagging far behind in its progress on gender equality. The basis, this number shows that the industry, and when you look at the industry, the 2018 numbers show that the mining industry is the second largest maiden gender, has the second largest maiden gender gap, with construction coming first. It is therefore fair to say that the mining industry is obviously a laggard among laggards. And so this same issue on the global scale is reflected similarly in Africa. In fact, the mining industry is sort of like it plays a critical role in Africa's economic development. How it also actually is about 4.5%, contributes about 4.5% of Africa's GDP. However, 50% of its population has been forced out of the mining industry. And I say forced out because it's not a deliberate refusal of women to participate in the mining industry. Now, what are some of the factors that I have noticed in the mining industry that has affected women's role in that industry? One is sexist biases. What do I mean by sexist biases? Is the prevalence of these machismo attitudes of men. So we have this boys club phenomena where managing directors are employing or recruiting and mentoring people in like image. If you don't look like them, then you can't join the club. So this actually forces women out of the mining industry. The second factor is that the working conditions in the mining industry is not suitable for women. I'll give two examples. One is a fly-in, fly-out model, where mining companies require their employees to fly into remote areas to work and then fly back home. This creates a challenge for women who are trying to balance responsibilities at home and at work. So invariably, you're automatically forcing women out of the mining industry. Another second example is that the basic facilities in the mining industry is designed for men. Something as basic as the uniform or the PPEs is not available for pregnant women. So if you're a woman and you're in the mining industry and you happen to be pregnant, you cannot get access to PPEs that are suitable for you. What does this do? It drives you out of the mining industry. Finally, it's important for me to state that even though there are about 15% of women in the mining industry, when you take a critical analysis of the job that these women hold in the mining industry, what you realize is that it's either clerical or support services, i.e. secretaries, customer services, and things like that. And because of technology, in the near future, these positions would be erased. And what would happen? We would have completely wiped out women from the mining industry. So it is very important that we take steps to ensure that women remain in the mining industry. Now, one important thing to say is that for the mines of the future, mining must be sustainable. Research has shown that women are more predisposed to issues of local and global sustainability. So having women in the mining industry would actually have an impact on our fight against climate change. So in fact, it is essential, it's imperative, it's very, very important that we make sure that the women representation in the mining industry is increased. Not only increased, but women are supported to get into leadership positions in the mining industry. Thank you.
The kind of powerful comment that I always expect from Phoebe. Thank you, because you have contributed so richly to this ongoing dialogue, but also to the GR40. You know, both our leaders have created the discourse that will help to shape and inform GR40. Kiko is a lawyer from Japan. Yes, Kiko is a lawyer from Japan, but she's much more than a lawyer. She was the first woman in her city to be a train driver. A driver of trains. Yes, so she's much more than a lawyer. Kiko? Yes, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you for a nice presentation, and I am happy to talk with you. I was the first train driver at the railway company in Japan, and I received a award. You robbed our job from the senior male drivers.
So she was told that she was robbing the jobs of the senior male drivers.
Train drivers' job is for males, they said. So I accused, and it was a shocking moment because my company expected me to be a first female train driver and explore the new world, and the company expected female employees to be train drivers or train conductors, and the passengers percentage is almost half man and half female. So my company tried to tried to be more diverse the employees percentage. However, the actual thing I faced was terrible. However, I am proud of myself. I showed that female train driver can drive train, and thanks for the technologies, the work, as Phoebe said, the work of train drivers likely not depend on masses, and females can operate train. So I think more industry need females and women leadership. Thank you.
And Kiko has told me that one of the reasons she came to Penn Law was so that she could take classes such as Women Law and Leadership, so she could take these lessons back to Japan and not only run for leadership office, but also to make sure that other women run for leadership offices. Now we have several students who are going to make comments. Rachel, Meredith, Elizabeth, Lena, Lauren, Tim, Catherine, Akila, Lily, and Lorena. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to make comments from there because I think it will take a lot of time to go up and down. So who would like to go first? Rachel? Yes, Rachel. Yes.
Hi, so I was supposed to comment on the article about essentially family discrimination and its effects in the workplace. And when I was reading the cases that were given in the comments, one thing that I noticed over and over again was sort of this trend where the women would be doing really quality work and then would essentially just be passed over for promotions or forced out of their jobs on this assumption that because they were caring for a family member, have had a child, or maybe would have a child sometime in the theoretical future that their work was no longer relevant to their job experience. And it reminded me of other examples I've seen where it just seems like as soon as a woman becomes a caretaker, their own identity is subsumed by the person they're caring for. And this was something I saw while studying abroad in Korea as well, and I know this also happens in other countries where, for example, when a woman becomes a mother and she makes new friends, instead of being referred to as her name, she'll be referred to as, you know, so-and-so's mother. And so the friends will call each other by that name, essentially. And I don't believe there's always a similar trend with the fathers. So there's this repeated occurrence where just women's identity is subsumed, while the men who have also just had a new child or who are also helping care for a family member retain this individual identity, and it doesn't at all bear on their work experiences. And it just made me wonder how we, as allies, and for many of us as women ourselves, can avoid this sort of forcing women into this pitfall, and to see them beyond their role in the family as valuable workers and members of society who, yes, have a child, and yes, are caring for a family member, but for whom that's just one tiny facet of their entire identity.
Excellent. So Rachel, one of the reasons why I had you reread this article in preparation for GR40 is because the motherhood penalty is one of the barriers against women's leadership. And the kind of perceived notion that a woman's natural occupation and the primary occupation as motherhood is also one of those impediments and challenges to women's leadership. So if we are going to look at some of the root causes of why women are underrepresented in leadership, this is this stereotype that all women are born to be mothers and that all women's primary responsibility is motherhood. So excellent, Rachel. Meredith?
Yes.
Yes, Meredith.
I read the same article and had similar thoughts to Rachel. And I think something that I found interesting in the footnotes were a lot of cases cited, and a lot of the cases were cited from the late 90s, early 2000s, and you know, the language that these men use in the workplace was unbelievable. And I think, you know, possibly today we don't have as much of that outward language in discrimination with family leave, but it's more inherent in the system, and I think it's just innate in the relationship that a mother has. Like, you know, when I was at a law firm this summer, they have an option where you can reduce your hours after coming back to the office, and you get, you know, the same rate, whatever, but less billable hours. And a lot of the partners said, you know, anecdotally, it's not realistic. So I just posed the question of, you know, an ongoing question of, it's innate in this situation that a lot of women face, and how do we, you know, the workforce is trying to make it easier, but it's, again, like, it's not actually feasible in real time.
So, Meredith, you made such an excellent point, and we talked about it with Sanjay Sama in the language that we use, both formally, informally. You know, that language is meant to subordinate women. You know, the use of the word chairperson, the use of the word hysteria, and the ways in which, you know, as you said, though the use of language has changed, those subtle biases continue to plague the work world, and that is what this class is about. You know, how do we identify those almost invisible barriers? Elizabeth? Yes.
So I read our professor's article entitled "Why Women's Leadership is the Cause of Our Time," in which she discusses how the substantial underrepresentation of women in leadership roles is primarily due to the disproportionate share of caregiving responsibilities, saying, quote, "The biggest gender inequality gap is in access to inputs, with the largest input gap being time, because women carry a disproportionate household workload," end quote. She also says, if men are given the opportunity and are required to carry an equal share of caregiving work, caregiving will be privileged and acknowledged in high-level careers. So in this class, we've talked about how different parental leave policies have been implemented in organizations, and you know, what Meredith was mentioning previously about sort of how do we operate as individuals in law firms or other organizations in the aftermath of having children and sort of navigating having careers and families as women, and, you know, for the men in our class and in our, you know, society. And I think clearly there are workplace regulations that are really, really important, many of which are influenced by or required by laws in different countries and states. And one thing that we've discussed in this class is how so many key decisions are not made in, you know, big boardrooms or, you know, among sort of leaders in positions of power in governments, but are made in more sort of private and intimate conversations between individuals, for example, between partners, about sort of how to go about dividing responsibilities with families. And so sort of the question that I have sort of personally, and that relates, I think, across for many, many people, is sort of what can we do to close this really substantial gap, sort of in terms of like leading by example in our lives and in our organizations as we move forward, because it's just such a challenging sort of thing to navigate. And I think, as some of my classmates have pointed out, there are sort of differential expectations in society around what it means to be a mother and what it means to be a father, not to mention the sort of like inherent biological distinctions of like which party is the one actually giving birth to the baby or the babies.
So thank you, Elizabeth, for that very astute comment. Now, a very distinguished alumna of this law school, Justice Mogoro of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, who went on to become the Chief Justice of South Africa, and she's a Penn Law alumna, in one of her rulings stated that the stereotype regarding childcare responsibilities has denied fathers the opportunity to participate in child rearing to the detriment of both the father and their children. So having the opportunity to be a caregiver as a father is both a right and an opportunity that is denied by gender stereotypes that only see mothers and motherhood as the primary caregivers in the family. So, you know, it is one that denies men that rightful opportunity to be caregivers and to have the workplace recognize father's role in the family. So thank you, Elizabeth, for that. And now we are joined by one of the most important leaders in business in the United States, Wanji Walcott, who is the Chief Legal Counsel at Pinterest, one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. Previously, she was the Chief Legal Counsel, the General Counsel at Discover, which is also one of the biggest finance institutions in the world. Wanji, you are probably the most important legal counsel in corporate America. And now, given your role around the world, the platform that you have, that you help to lead, is one that transcends borders and boundaries in the world. So Wanji, as you know, we are embarking on a sacred task, and I call it sacred because this is about women's leadership. And Nicole Aveline, the former Minister of Women's Affairs, the former Minister of Parity, and the former Minister of the Sea in France, is leading the charge to draft a new general recommendation for the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is part of the international normative framework. So this becomes part of the soft law in the world. This becomes part of the canon of international law and international jurisprudence. And it is about time in 2023 that we have the canon recognize the role of women's leadership in human rights and around the world, in business, in STEM, in technology, in innovation, in our homes and in our parliaments, and in our houses of parliament. So Wanji, I want you to help Nicole Ameline, who is my colleague on the convention, on the treaty body, but who is the chief drafter and the chief architect and the visionary of this sacred recommendation, I want you to speak briefly about the ways in which women in leadership make change for their businesses and for the world.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind words of introduction. I so appreciate you and all of you who are here today. So I'm going to maybe start by sharing a very brief story. So 20 years ago, on August 14th, 2003 at 4 p.m., we had the Northeast blackout, which was a significant power outage affecting the entire eastern seaboard. We didn't know what was happening. Was it terrorism? Were we in danger? What was going to happen? At the time, I worked for American Express. I think I had 2 direct reports then. So I was a sort of budding leader at the time. And it was only 2 years after 9/11, so it was a bit scary. My office building was evacuated, and I proceeded to my bus stop to catch the large coach bus that I commuted on in and out of New Jersey. Now, the dispatch guy at the bus stop announced that the bus was not coming because all of the tunnels into New York City had been closed because of the power outage, and that we needed to somehow get across the Hudson River via a ferry, and that our buses would meet us across the river and then take us to central New Jersey on our regular commute. Now, there were 3 guys in line at the bus, and the bus line had gotten really long because no buses were coming. The 3 guys behind me were standing there, and I remember turning to them, and I looked at them, and I said, "What should we do?" And I just got back blank stares. And so I quickly realized that it was time to leave. These guys that I was relying on were actually relying on me to figure it out. But I decided I'm going to figure it out. So this was my team. I brought these 3 guys together and myself as a team, calling each person by their company name. So we had Goldman, Merrill, Citi, and myself, Amex. And I leveraged the skills and resources of this group. One guy had an amazing sense of humor that kept all of us laughing and in hysterics during a time of complete chaos in Lower Manhattan that day. One guy had cash, which was really important because we needed that, because once we got across the river, we had to take a taxi. And because of the power outage, ATMs weren't working, credit cards couldn't be used. And then one guy had a cell phone on T-Mobile. I didn't know anyone at that time with a cell phone on T-Mobile, but he had a T-Mobile phone. That was important because the AT&T network was down, the Verizon network was down, and of the 4 of us, he's the only one who had a phone, which allowed all of us to call our families and let them know that we were okay. Now, ultimately, I helped us figure out which ferry to get on. Again, we were bus riders, not ferry riders. We don't know how the ferry works. But we realized what ferry to get on, ended up across the river, had to take a taxi. Anyway, we made it finally back to where our bus was. Turns out we were the first group to make it across the Hudson River to our bus. Now, after that day, I never saw these guys again, but I realized that day that, you know what, I'm a pretty good leader. These guys didn't have to follow me, they didn't work for me, but I sort of gave them a sense that, you know what, you should follow me because I'm going to help us achieve our goal. And I also realized that day that when women lead, everybody benefits. I think many of us are aware of all of the research that has shown that women leaders help drive fairness and equity, they promote collaboration, we inspire loyalty and commitment, and we increase productivity. And in addition, many women leaders have certain characteristics like empathy, self-awareness, great problem-solving abilities, and just overall judgment that are essential skills to becoming a good leader in business. Now, I'll leave you with this. When faced with the uncertainty of this major power outage and not knowing, how I was going to get home, if I was going to get home, if we were in danger, I must admit that I had fear. And Zig Ziglar said that fear has 2 meanings, the acronym FEAR. It could mean forget everything and run, or it could mean face everything and rise. And I made a choice that day to lead. And I really believe that women can lead with excellence. So I will leave you with those words and challenge everyone to lead. Wonderful. Thank you.
survey is such a perfect metaphor for the GR40,
Yes.
as well as the jurisprudence in my class, Wanji. And I'm going to, I know you have to run, but just 1 minute. Nicole, do you want to respond to Wanji? 1 minute? Nicole?
Oh, I have taken a lot of notes, but I love this last experience because I think that she's totally right. First of all, we have to pose a question. How do you see yourself as leaders or not? And it's really a tough question because with our education, stereotypes, global system, it's not easy. But you are absolutely right. Women know perfectly how to manage complexity. And they have a very, very good capacity to meet the challenges, even the global challenges that we face nowadays. I think that the qualities is perfect right now. But I love your fear, of course. I think that I have to take it in mind. But globally, I would like to thank you, Ranjita. Really, it was so rich and inspiring. I love your vision about critical mass because it's true that we need to create a wave of leaders. And as I said, women are leaders. They are the change for the world. They are the change we need. And we have to create a sort of accelerator program, and very innovative program. And it is the goal of this GR. But we need your really your experience, and I would like to create with all of you, a platform for the GR40 because it will be a great ongoing process between us. Ranjita, I have noted a lot of new concepts, and I consider that we have to be very radical in the elaboration of the draft because we need a new chain of values. We need new concepts, and I like also very much the idea of a chemical reaction to the leadership of women for the world, because again, it's not only a right, it's a chance, it's a wonderful opportunity, and I have appreciated a lot the reflection about the fact that resilience is the best expression of the leadership of women today. And it's so right. So we have really to introduce all these excellent and very strong reflections, and to be very, not only ambitious, but radical. I love this vision, this common vision, and I thank you, and I thank the young students because it's for them, and it is with them that we have to do it. And I count on them to get rid of this patriarchal global system that is facing now a sort of obsolescence. There is a crisis of efficiency, a crisis of legitimacy, a crisis of accountability. And we cannot go on this way. We have really to create a sort of new vision. And I would like to end on AI. I have appreciated a lot also the intervention, the presentation, because in this new technology system, the risk is to reconstruct new discriminations, new structural discriminations, and it will be the worst thing, because it means that the design of the changing world, its management, will be a sort of aggravation for women's rights. So now I'm sure that we are on the very right way. If this exchange has been recorded, I would like so much to have the script to integrate, and congratulations again, Ranjita. Thanks to you. we have the strong, how can I say, inspiring tone. And
thank you,
I like
Nicole.
that so much.
And Wanji, Nicole was the minister who was responsible and who was the architect of the parity principle in the French Constitution. And this was the first provision in a constitution that acknowledged parity, gender parity, as a constitutional norm, as part of the constitution. It was enshrined in the constitution and became a part of the constitutional theory that went on to impact many countries. So the countries that followed, that introduced parity principles or a quota, came out of Nicole's legacy of introducing this as part of the French Constitution. So Wanji, I thank you for that very inspiring note that we end on. Your story is so, it is one that stands as a metaphor. It also, kind of unpacks all of the complexities of leadership, because you also spoke about the vulnerability, right? You spoke about the kind of fear that you had of the situation and of leading these 4 other businessmen from these 4 major business houses. So thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much, Wanji. This is...
Congratulations.
Wanji, do you have 1 minute? Do you have 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I have a few students who, have been looking forward to welcoming you because, you kind of are their aspiration. Everyone wants to be a Wanji Walker in this room. So I'm going to ask a few other students whether they would like to be able to respond to you. Anyone here in this room who had a question for Wanji? Directly, or I'm going to call on the interlocutors. Okay, so I'm going to call on who would like to, Tim, Catherine, Akila, Lily? Tim? Yes, yeah. Tim. So we have a male ally, so that's, yes, good. Yes.
It's great to be in this class.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm thrilled to have you in this class.
I'm serious.
Seriously, no, I know, we're all serious. Do you want to come here quickly so that they can actually see Tim? Because, I know I'm not going to celebrate the men in the class at the expense of the women. The women come first, but, the women need allies. So very quickly.
No, it's okay. I think here for this class, I'm okay with the space.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So I read a piece on the book Shortlisted.
Yes.
Of course, it was a short video about what the book is about by Professor Kanaki. It's a great book. It's a book about this issue about creating the appearance of diversity without actually committing to the reality of creating diversity. And one of the issues that Professor Kanaki discusses in the book is how we have these wonderful, dynamic, and very intelligent women and minorities who get shortlisted, but ultimately don't get selected. And so I was thinking, what's the simple solution? And I guess the simple solution is to select more.
Yes.
And then I was thinking, is that really the optimal solution? If we just simply select more women and minorities from that shortlist, I guess at the face of it, it seems like the problem is solved. But then I was thinking maybe there's more of a systematical approach that we can take. And of course, I think I searched this up, just extra, but like towards the end, the last chapter, I think Professor Kanaki kind of discusses some of the solutions, right? I mean, really the book is more of an invitation to discuss this matter. But, of course, there's really no one kind of one approach to solving this issue, such a big issue. But I was thinking, why do we even have a shortlist then? What is the definition of a shortlist if we're not going to be implementing it in such a way that promotes diversity? So, yeah, I mean, I guess if we're working within a framework or a system where it's so difficult to, promote diversity and I'm from South Korea, and the way that they pick judges, at least in my country, is that we don't have like a short list. It's more of a objective standard that's used so that they don't exclude certain people because of their backgrounds. I understand that in this country, the president is the one who kind of appoints the Supreme Court justices, but I'm just kind of wondering, what can we do to kind of to combat this issue?
I love the way you probed that article. I want to explain to our distinguished guests what the article was about, the book was about. So Kaneke, Professor Kaneke is a close colleague of mine, and in fact my leadership article was published in Professor Kaneke's textbook on women, power and leadership. She wrote this groundbreaking book on shortlisting women, because it stems from the Mansfield Rule. The Mansfield Rule in the legal profession demands that every corporation shortlists women as part of diversity and equity kind of philosophy. But what Professor Kaneke argues is that shortlisting becomes a ruse, becomes almost window dressing, because by shortlisting, you are giving the impression that you're seriously considering these women and minorities when you are not. You have another candidate outside of the shortlist, but the shortlist legitimizes and it makes you look credible. It legitimizes the way in which the process, the search process is carried out without really having to select a candidate from the shortlist. And she gives us an example, the 9 women Supreme Court justices, 9 women who were shortlisted for the Supreme Court. Right, so we hear about the struggle that Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor and the others went through to be considered. But she says there are 9 other women whose stories we are yet to know. And these 9 women were shortlisted without any serious intention of appointing them, because it made the president look good. And in fact, President Nixon says that, oh, my constituents will love this, just put her in. Very casually and cavalierly, he says, put her in, as if, I'm never going to consider her, but we will shortlist her. So the act of shortlisting can be an act of masking the real problem. So I think we need to consider that in women's leadership, that many companies, whether it's in public leadership or in the private sector, have begun to tell everyone, oh, we have a list, but they didn't really come up to the standard we were looking for. So this is an excellent way in which you presented and framed it, Tim. And I think this is something, again, that, Nicole, we need to look at when we are...
Yes, if I just say one word, I would say that parity has to become a principle. And for instance, in France, we have, first of all, of course, all political spheres introduced quota. Also in the board of big companies. But for instance, in the process of nomination, we have considered that at the same level of skills, a woman has to be chosen and nominated. So it has been a sort of accelerator program to make really a serious implementation. But you are absolutely right. We have to be aware of false solutions. And but if people are totally in the new parity shift and mentality, we can imagine that they play the game.
Absolutely.
And I will, maybe if I can add to that,
yes.
I think that this is a deep issue in that I believe it starts with creating the right pipelines. So, again, to avoid window dressing where people are selected, maybe not based on merit, but other reasons, I hate that. I don't think that's the answer. I do think, though, however, we need to kind of look at very early on to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to become qualified. And that requires the opportunity to get a fine education. It requires the opportunity to have access to jobs, additional training, promotional opportunities, leadership opportunities, so that you begin to build and increase the pipeline of available talent to choose from. So that you swing the pendulum the other way and have a situation where there are numerous qualified candidates, and so you're not just kind of relying on a few candidates who are kind of there but maybe not as qualified as the selected candidates, and are not maybe progressing through these processes and landing with the intended role, because I think that doesn't help anybody, right? But I think focusing on pipelines and getting everybody ready and really thinking about that in an inclusive way, I think will begin to make a difference.
So pipelines to leadership, I think that is, in response to Tim's question, but really legitimate pipelines, pipelines that see the authenticity, an authentic pipeline. Thank you to my students, and the students who couldn't make comments, if you could send us a blurb, I'm going to send it to Nicole. So I would like a blurb from you on your thoughts. And then, Nicole, what we can do is that, with the permission of my students, be able to send you some of the work of the students in a way that can really help to influence the work of the GR40. Wanjit, this has been once again a pleasure and a privilege to be able to host.